And today's teacher chat is about building classroom communities and different ways that we as teachers can help build that relationship and connection with our kids so that we are better able to connect and therefore teach them. And I'm joined today by K-5 elementary teacher, Nikki Vradenburg. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm enjoying the last couple hours before starting back to school stuff. So this is a well-timed of thinking about connecting with kids.
Good. I was just at a Google Fest yesterday presenting and working with teachers, and all of them. That conference was like the wake up and realize that summer is over and it's time to start thinking about the new school year. And I just loved the energy. I love back to school energy. I think for us, it's like the new year. You know, this is how we ring in the new year. It's back to school and everything feels new and shiny and like it's a fresh start. So that's what's exciting to me.
And it's exciting in part because now, and I would say even at the high school level that was true, maybe there was a little bit more resentment on the part of the students of like, now I have to wake up before noon or before 11 a.m. That they have to be there. But in general, there is that fresh start. So our goal today is to talk about some different ways that you as teachers can capitalize on that fresh start feeling and get to know those kiddos. How did you start the year?
Well, in an elementary classroom, and I worked in a really small rural school, so the longer I was there, I had this wonderful advantage of knowing families for multiple years. And so in the last few years I was in the school, I had already met or worked with that family, and so it was just time for me to have this child. But occasionally getting to know kids, you'd have some new kids that came in or kids that didn't know me. And so from day one, it was about setting up, getting to know one another, and letting them draw pictures that express themselves. Writing for us was a big way for kids to show who they were and what they were interested in. And so my kids were writing from the first day forward, telling me about who they were and what they were interested in and who was important to them. And then we also would go into, I used digital things. The last 6 years, I was really interested in digital work with my kids. And so I had a classroom blog that we got set up the very first week of school. Now I'm helping teachers use Seesaw, which I think is just such a great tool for this kind of thing. And the very first post on that blog is an introduction. Tell your audience who you are and what you're into. And that for me was such a beautiful picture of just who they were and what they brought to the table. And then as time went on, we had a really important, and I talked about this in our video that we used to promote this web chat series, which was Sharing Circle, and the power of that part of that daily routine for us, which was giving kids the time and space that was non-negotiable. It was a part of our day no matter what. And it was the way we started the day. We always began the day by sitting in a circle. We had a little ball that we passed around so that kids could, when they were holding the ball, they got to share. And this was how we taught conversation. We taught that when you, sorry, I'm getting distracted by the chat box. Sorry. We taught that when you shared who you were and what you were doing, and then we had people take turns making comments and making conversation with one another. And as the year kind of continued, we did things like compliment circle, where kids could give or receive a compliment based on how they were feeling and what they wanted to talk about that day. So that was probably the strongest and the place where I got to know my kids. I learned all kinds of juicy details in Sharing Circle that I could torment parents with in parent-teacher conferences to talk about some of the things they were sharing. And I always said on back to school night, I'd tell parents about Sharing Circle and say, so just so you know, I'm getting this news every morning, and I will make a deal with you. I will only believe half of what I hear if you will do the same.
Oh, that's nice.
Always got a good laugh
Yes.
because it was opened up with, oh, you're right. So they're coming and telling us things. They're going to do the same thing at school, aren't they?
Right. And so take those things with a grain of salt a little
Right,
bit.
right.
I didn't use Seesaw to get to know my high schoolers, but some of those things are in this activity resource sheet. And I put the link in the chat and I'll put it in the video description. I use student surveys. So one of the things that I would do the first day, I kind of created a virtual scavenger hunt kind of thing that I made my juniors and seniors do, of just making them, instead of me showing them like, here is our classroom Schoology page, and here's how you find this, and here's how you do this, and here is the syllabus. I had everything on Schoology because that was the learning management system that the school I taught at used. And then I had my welcome slide projected and they had instructions on that slide. And so the first day of class, I barely spoke to them, which was kind of weird at the high school level.
Yeah.
Like I welcomed them and then we would chat a little bit. I would do a first round of attendance and I would ask them, always made sure, and I think this is intuitive for us as teachers, like, what do you prefer to be called? Like, what do you prefer? What is your preferred name? Mm-hmm. And particularly my students who had foreign names, I made them correct me until I said it correctly. Because a lot of them in this area, if they have an unusual name, I found that as a junior or senior, they can be kind of self-conscious about that. And so they just let the teacher, like, just say it how you're going to say it in your American, North Dakotan, Norwegian way. And I would say, no, but that's not your name. Like, if I want to call you by your name. And so I would make them practice a little bit. But this student survey, this little inventory that I have linked in the resource, I shared what questions I asked students. That was part of the scavenger hunt. And so they would go through the stuff that I had on my Schoology. So they had to find the syllabus so that they got used to, how do you find a folder? How do you find different things? And then they had to find this link. This was an assignment on Schoology. So then they were practicing, where do you find assignments? Where are assignments posted? How do you know when something is due? Like, how do you complete an assignment? So I kind of designed the first day. And of course, the first time I did this, first period, first day, like the Wi-Fi wasn't working. Like, I had created an entire lesson of kids doing a digital scavenger hunt, and then we had no Wi-Fi. Which was fine. After you're teaching for 10 years, you can just kind of go, all right, we're doing something else and roll with it. But it was really demoralizing. It was a good reminder of that hubris as a teacher, that about the time you have things figured out, like, something's going to happen that you're going to go, oh, never mind, I don't.
The teachers I talked with yesterday were really excited about that scavenger hunt idea too. It came up of a QR code scavenger hunt too.
Oh, cool.
Placing QR codes around the room, with explanations about what certain parts of the room were for. And the aha that teacher had was, gosh, that's way better than me standing up in front of the room and droning on, and it has them walking around. And I guess for this school, they also have to go through their school handbook. That's sort of a requirement. And so they were all really interested in creating some kind of a scavenger hunt activity that had the kids going through that handbook, instead of the boring alternative of just going through it as a group.
Yeah. Because we know all of these best practices in teaching, and yet somehow, and this is me talking about me teaching even 5 years ago compared to me teaching the last 5 years. The first day of school was not indicative of how I wanted to run my classroom, because it was me standing in front of the group of kids kind of lecturing all day of, like, here is your syllabus. These are the expectations. This is what we're doing.
Mhm.
And so the last 3-4 years, I really tried to shift that into, we'll get to that stuff.
Mhm.
We'll get to that stuff, or we're going to do it in a different way. But that I was really setting the expectation that this is a collaborative classroom. So as you come in here, I'm going, and setting that expectation that you are in charge of your learning. And so I am going to create the learning environment, and I'm going to give you the tools you need to be successful. But we're going to start practicing day one that you are in the driver's seat of that. And I just set everything up, and now you get to interact with that space. So that was something that I really enjoyed.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did, and I didn't.
Routine.
Go ahead. What's
No,
another?
go ahead. Well, so we had an ed camp on Saturday, and we were talking about one of the sessions. This was just for early childhood educators. And one of the sessions was about reading and writing workshop, and how do you get kids set up at the beginning of the year for writing, and, you know, especially when their bodies aren't used to it and they maybe have a hard time coming up with ideas to write about. And so I shared in that session, I kind of put all my content on hold for the first couple of weeks and had a student of the day activity that was a writing activity. And so this was a get to know my students activity, as well as an introduction to both shared writing and independent writing. So each afternoon, and it was great social studies because we were getting to know the people within our little community. And that's elementary social studies starts with that sense of place of where I am here, and then you go out into school community, a bigger community in the world. And so if you start with where you are right here, so the student of the day sat in the teacher's chair, and the class took turns asking them questions about things they liked. And ultimately we covered food and colors and pets, and vacations and things like that. And then I took the pen and we summarized that interview by doing a shared writing. We wrote a paragraph together, a story, we called it, about that person. And then they went back to their seats and they drew a picture of that person. And if they could copy my story, they could do that. Or if they wanted to write their own version of the story, they could do that. Little ones, if they just wrote the kid's name, that was fine. I was in a K1, so I had all things happening. I had kids just drawing pictures and copying a name, and I had other kids writing their own story. And so then that story, that copy of the story, went home that night for families to read with their child and talk about that student and what they learned about that student. And then they all went into a class book, and everybody got a copy of that class book when we were done with the whole activity. So obviously in a class of, 15 to 16 kids, it took 15 to 16 days of, 45 minutes periods of doing this. Kids were so excited for their turn, and to be the person that got to share. The parents loved it because they felt like they got to know the peers that their kids had at school, and that they had talking points again for who their kids were hanging out with during the day. And one mom said, I could see common interests showing up. And so then I knew who to talk to about play dates and things like that. So,
Sure.
And it was a wonderful way for us all to just get to know one another. And they got to interview me for one of the days. And so we wrote a session about Mrs. V, and added that to the book. And that book, like I said, I was at the same school for so long that when the graduating class went to graduate 8th grade, I always took the copy of their book down for them to look at that in those final school. And they would love going through and just laughing about, Zach loves tacos and tigers. Zach's favorite color is yellowish blue, and they would just tease each other. And it was such a wonderful, that community feeling just continued with activity. So that was one of my favorites.
We did in my English class, I used something called This I Believe, which is an NPR essay series. They're short, usually, 600 words. So this was a nice introductory writing assignment for juniors and seniors, because 600 words for them isn't super long, but it's still pushing them. It's more than most of them want to write. But we would read a couple examples of This I Believe essays, and I tried to pick out some that were a couple famous people, but then also a couple teenagers, because this, I believe's website has all of these different essays that people all over the place have written. So they would get some models, and then they would write a This I Believe essay. And that was one of the ways that I got to know them in their first writing assignment.
Yeah.
In my theater class, and on reflection, I think this would work really well in any English class where you do speeches. My theater kids had to start the year, their first monologue was called A Song of Self. And so they couldn't sing. I didn't want an actual song, but they had to share something about who they were. And they could do that by sharing an anecdote of just something that they really appreciate. So some kids would bring in an object and then tell a story about that object. Some students would take song lyrics that were really important to them and recite the song lyrics as just a spoken monologue. And a lot of kids told stories. So I always started, because they were confused about what, like, I have to do a monologue, but it's about myself. So I would model for them and just share a story from my childhood that was important to me. And I found that, similar to your students writing stories, it became a very cathartic and a very connecting experience. A lot of kids were willing to share, I was sort of surprised, very intimate details of just telling us their story of their song. And I always loved hearing kids who would be like, well, I don't know what to tell about myself. And I would say, where were you born? And this girl, a senior, said, well, I was born in Somalia. And I was like, and how did you get to North Dakota? And she was like, well, she started telling me this story. And I said, tell us that story. Just put a map up and tell us the story. Because I said, I guarantee you, your classmates do not know that this is your story. So she tells us this story of being born in one country and then family members dying because of the war, and then moving to refugee camps, and then other people dying. And it was this whole journey, and she's just sharing this, and the whole class is just dumbfounded that they had no idea that this was this girl's reality. And she's sharing it so simply and humbly and beautifully, of just, and so thankfully, she was like, that's why I'm really excited that I'm here. And I'm glad to be in high school at West Fargo, because it's so much better than anything that I've experienced before. And that really, she as a senior is sharing that, it really opened the door. And I found that for an acting class where it was very important for the kids to have trust with each other, because we were going to be giving a lot of feedback, we were going to be critiquing each other a lot, it really laid the foundation for us being comfortable, being vulnerable with each other. But I also did it with a general, group of kids at another high school, and got a wide variety of kids explaining their name, some kids dancing to explain who they were. And I just called it a song of self, little thing. Your sharing circle, I don't know if you saw this, your sharing circle idea reminded me of this. I saw this on Twitter just the other day. And this teacher uses a circle at the end of the day. So this is a middle school classroom, and they have to do an appreciation, an apology, or an aha that they experienced. And this was what he used as their exit ticket at the end of a lesson. So there's this lovely little video on Edutopia. And so the first speaker just says, I want to show appreciation for this other student who helped me today. Another kid shares an aha moment they had. And another student, which I thought was pretty cool, this kid, he apologizes for having his headphones in during the class and for not being present in the class. And the teacher then again doesn't scold him, just says, I really appreciate that apology. Thank you for that. And then they keep moving on in the circle. So this reminded me of your sharing circle or your community meeting. but in a slightly different strategy of an appreciation, an apology, or an aha.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
I think so I always thought about trying to wrap up the day with that kind of thing. We know reflection is so powerful. We know that sending them home on a positive note is so powerful. And that was always a place I fell flat. Frankly, the day just got away on me. And before I knew it, I was shoving things in their backpacks and shoving them on the floor. And there wasn't that time for reflection. And if I had it to do it again, things like that, there would be a carved out period of time where that was just as sacred as all of the stuff I did at the beginning of the day.
And for me, it was at the end of the week. I didn't do this every day in my high school classes, but on Fridays, we would share moments of joy. Mm-hmm. And some days it was optional. Like I would just say who has a joy that they want to share. And some days at the beginning of the year, it was mandatory. Like I made everyone share. And part of my motivation was to help them shift their mindset of, even when things are really crappy, I'm going to choose to focus on something positive that's going well in my life. Mm-hmm. And so we would share moments of joy, and same things I would model. And like sometimes my moment of joy would be, my moment of joy today was I saw a kid in the hallway stop and pick up garbage that was not his. And I was really excited by that because people care about this school. Mm-hmm. But the moments of joy were interesting to me because I really got a sense of who struggled to find a moment of joy. Those kids who had a hard time week after week coming up with something positive that was going on in their lives. And that gave me an opportunity to visit with that student. But the moments of joy also gave me a window into what you were saying of what's going on. So if I had an 11th grader say, I'm really excited because I get to see my dad this weekend, or I'm excited because, this weekend is hunting opener. I know something that's important. And then I had a little system. After that class, I would jot down on some Post-it notes, and then I would leave those on my computer. I wrote what period it was and what kid. And then as I was greeting students, because certainly part of them is just greet them at the door. As I was greeting students Monday morning, I tried to make sure to hit 4 or 5 kids with a specific question connecting back to their moment of joy, particularly if it was something timely. Mm-hmm. And just to show them that I was listening. Usually they didn't share much, right? They're 17, 18 years old, but I would just say, hey, how was hunting this weekend? Just to show them that I was listening to their moment of joy and I did care. I'm curious, for the other folks who are on with us this morning, what are your strategies? How do you like to get to know your kids? What are the systems that you have built in your classroom for some activities or some favorite things that you like to do just to help build that classroom community?
This is Troy. I can speak. We do morning meeting. It's like a kind of a required beginning of the day, or a highly encouraged beginning of the day. And I did away with all of the elementary jobs. Some teachers have 16 different jobs, and it's just it's beyond me to keep all those straight. So I just have a president and a vice president. We go down the list. So the first person on the list is the president, and the second one is the vice president. So every day it changes, and they are the first 2 to get to share. And then if we have more time, others can share. And after each one shares, they get to call on 3 students to take questions about what they shared. Oh, and cool. Yeah, and sometimes the kids come up with better questions than I would, or they can ask different things than I can. So, so it is good, and I do try to do the make a mental note so that when I meet them at the door the next day or on the way out, I can encourage them or let them know that I heard them, because I do think relationships are key. Mm-hmm. So those are some things. And we do have brain breaks throughout the day.
What do you like to use for your brain breaks?
My number one go-to is Simon Says. It's been the most popular. And they like to I'm actually very good at getting them out. And so it's a big challenge to see who can stay in and be the last one in. I can get them out usually quite quickly. And so we have like actually a whole note card, like a flip chart of all of the ones that our school has come up with now that we can use, and they have a brain break of the week. So I try to do that like once a week, but usually when they choose, they either want to play Simon Says or Heads Up, 7 Up, or some movement kind of game. So
Sure.
yeah.
Have another third grade teacher that I know, she does like similar to you, like with the president, and then that, I don't think she calls that person the president for morning meeting, but that person is in charge of kind of leading warm-ups that day, of like doing the weather and doing like some questions, and they do a yoga pose. And then that whoever was president, the equivalent of your president that day, right, they get to choose the brain break when they get to brain break time. So it's like kind of a whole day of that kid getting to have ownership of stuff.
And mine is a whole day, and they love being called the president and the vice president. The president also leads the line, and the vice president is at the end of the line. And all day long, they get to be at the front of the line, and all day long, they get to be called on first. And if I need something to go to the office, it's the president. If the president's busy or still working or out of the class or absent, the vice president fills in. So it's just easy. It's like right down the list, it's the president. And then I just say, who's the president? And I don't have to be like, okay, now, all of that juggling. And it's like, I have enough to juggle without, And plus I have a chart, and they get president by their name that day. So
yeah.
That's a great
works for me.
And I liked the reminder of the brain breaks. We do have that on the activities to know them, but I think you're spot on. And I think you as elementary school teachers do this better than we high school teachers do. But this was something that, again, as I kept teaching, like 17-year-olds spend a lot of their day, if you follow a high school student, they spend a lot of their day walking to a classroom and then sitting still in a chair for 50 minutes, getting up, walking to another classroom, sitting still in a chair for 50 minutes. And we know that that's just not good for how they learn. And so if you can do things, I think brain breaks even help minimize stress and just help get them moving and thinking. And so that's been one of my goals as a high school teacher in an English classroom that can be kind of sedentary, but to get the kids moving. And usually they were a little begrudging of doing the movement that I wanted them to do. But I got 17-year-olds to do the pokey with vocab words. We would study Latin prefixes, suffixes, and roots. And so when we were doing the parts of the body to review for that vocabulary quiz, we would do the hokey pokey. And they all, like, to start, they were like, you have got to me, Bakkegard. Like, I'm not doing that. And then I would just do it full bore and look like a fool. And then they would start giggling, and then they would do the hokey pokey. But I think your reminder about brain breaks, I think we as high school teachers need to hear that more. And we need to learn from our elementary school colleagues that that's right. We need to be finding those breaks for high schoolers.
Well, and as a teacher, it's fun. It's nice to just keep going and get everything in. But when you think of going to a staff meeting, it's like, okay, we need a brain break. It's like, so I just try to put myself in their place. And I was like, yeah, you need a brain break, because I get it.
I think once you give the kids that language, a brain break, my kids began to ask for that kind of thing. We used Go Noodle a lot in my class, and we had certain parts of the day where we logged into Go Noodle and did the little video brain break on there. And I had a system with my spinner on my iPad that I let the person who came up on the spinner choose which brain break that we did during that session. Sometimes there were designated parts of the day where they just knew that I was going to bring up the Go Noodle and we were going to do that. And then other times I would have kids advocate for that. Like, okay, I need a break. I need a brain break. And I think that's, again, teaching them how to monitor their own feelings and their own workflow.
And what a gift that you're giving those kids when you're helping them see that in themselves of, oh, I'm not being productive right now because I'm too distracted mentally because I haven't moved in an hour.
Yeah.
Of I fall into that when I'm sitting at my computer doing something for a couple hours, all of a sudden I hit that wall and I'm like, man, like I can't focus on anything. And it's like, well, because you've been sitting on your butt for 2 hours straight just staring at a computer, maybe you could go do something, and that would give you a little bit more. It's the other thing in here, we talked about this, the leader of the day. I love the president and the vice president. I think that's also a nice subtle way of working in some of those hierarchies of just being able to talk about social studies, being able to talk about some of those other ideas. Do either of you, I think that this is also important for kids. How do you help give kids just space for choice? Like if I'm part of a classroom community, how do I work within that community? Like what does that look like as a learner?
Well, one way we have choice, I guess, is like for reading, they can choose in which order they want to do it. If they want to do reading first, independent reading or writing or word work. They can sit around the room and decide if they want to sit under their desk or in a beanbag or in a more comfortable chair when they're reading independently. So little things like that are choices.
Great.
Not sure if that's...
Yeah, those are good examples. We used a structure called the Daily 5 for our reading block, our literacy block, and that gave students choice with the structured choice within that literacy block. And so, like you said, there were 5 choices, and one of them was work with teacher. And when they weren't working with the teacher, they were listening to reading by themselves, reading with someone else, or working with words, or working on writing. And so once they chose that station, they got to choose where they went. Then they could choose what they did within that. So if they went to read to self, they chose what they read, and they just had to be reading that whole time. If they chose work on writing, they got to work on any kind of piece of writing. And that was the independent work that happened while I was meeting with individuals or small groups. I also have recently been looking at this idea of playlists. And this is the thing where a teacher takes all the independent tasks that happen throughout the day, such as practicing your math facts, studying your vocabulary, your spelling words, reading by yourself, all of those things that a student has to do independently, and puts them on a list and hands the list to the student at the beginning of the day and says, I'm going to be over here working with small groups, and your job is to work your way through that list. And you can choose the order that you go about that list. It doesn't need to start at the top and end at the bottom. And just because I'm working on reading with this group doesn't mean you can't be working on math. But that's your list, and go ahead and get through with it. And at the end of this period, you'll need to present me your list and show me what you got done. And the only caveat is that you have to be working the whole time. And then also teaching them that when they're working through the list, if they have problems or they need help, they do 3 things to get themselves the help they need. One is to use whatever resources they have, whether that's a Chromebook or a student handbook, or use their peers, talk to a number of peers. And the last thing they do is to go interrupt the teacher and get help from that teacher. And so I saw it for the first time on a blog post by the Cult of Pedagogy, and read about it there. And I love the idea. I always got kind of stuck in, this is reading time, so all tasks should be reading related. When that really, I don't know why. I mean, that's really arbitrary. There's no reason why a kid couldn't be practicing math facts while I was working with a small group reading, and if that's what that student felt like doing at that moment, that's where their headspace was. why not give them the ability to do that? So I'm really interested in things like that. We know that when we provide kids those choices we as teachers can live with, but it gives them a little bit more flexibility to make those workflow choices. I think that goes a long way in building a strong classroom community and trust between student and teacher.
Go ahead.
I saw a teacher in it wasn't a third grade classroom. Her name's Cheryl. She has on her whiteboard, similar to your list, she would have the to-do list, and then they used Google Classroom. And so each day she posted, like in the class announcement, here's your to-do list for the day. And same type of thing, that they had a lot of flexible seating arrangements in her classroom. And so those two things partnered very well together. That if students have choice of what they're going to do, it's easier for them to sit somewhere by themselves because they can be working independently doing that. And so she had a nice system in place that it was visually up on the whiteboard so people could come and check it, like they could visually see it, but they also knew how to access it on the Google Classroom to get that same information.
And for ours, several things for both of you. We have the daily 5 at our school too, but it's kind of K through 2, and then 3 through 5 is daily 3.
Oh yeah.
We just have a shortened version, and so that longer time, like 20 minutes and 20 minutes and 20 minutes instead of in the hour. And I like your playlist idea, but actually our school kind of insists that we do reading during reading. We do math, because they want that much time dedicated to it. So, and we have push-in teachers that for both math and reading, AVMR math, and so we don't really have the flexibility to let them work on other things. But I do agree that when you feel like doing something, you should get to go a little longer, and then that's just normal to me.
Yeah. I think there could be a reading playlist though and a math playlist too to fit within that structure, because I work with a school too that 90-minute block is real
sacred.
Is a policy.
Yeah.
And it has to be a continuous 90 degrees. We can't 90 minutes. We can't do 10 here and 20 there, which to me makes more sense.
Me too.
But yeah, you're stuck. You got to do what they're making you do. So, but I think like within the reading block, you could find some of those independent tasks too, and let the kids work through them at their own pace too.
That's a cool idea of within that. I mean, again, high school is quite a bit different, but yeah, like within your reading block, you get to pick, you can read your book. There's an article on whatever that we're reading, but a few different reading tasks that could be divided out. And that is our daily 3, like during reading, they have the choices of what they are going to do. They kind of have to complete all of them sometime during that. It's just their choice of when.
Cool. Yeah. Good.
I also wanted to share, I liked this article from EdSurge. These were things that I found on Twitter I used my Twitter because of Nikki. I got on Twitter and I only follow teachers and other teaching organizations. And so I got a lot of ideas, but this was just last week. Within a couple days, I found all of these, that video that I showed, the 5 ways to build real teacher-student connections for the year ahead. And they talked about a lot of the same, about this new beginning, this idea, like this is a fresh start. So if you're going to do something, this is a great time to do it. And then they talked about the same things that we've all talked about just getting to know your kids. I like this one of just remember that you are human. Like it's okay if you make mistakes. That was a real problem for me. Well, it's still kind of a problem for me in life, but certainly as I was teaching, that was much more so true when I was 26 and I was teaching 18-year-olds and I looked like I was about 20. And, so like for me to make a mistake felt much more vulnerable at that time. But I think these were some good little reminders of sharing a little bit about your life, that you can use some sort of social media to connect. I liked Nikki's suggestion of using Seesaw and kind of having that class Seesaw feed, or using your journals to connect with that. This is similar. I like your hot seat thing. You could certainly do a 15-30 seconds in the hot seat, like this student's up, rapid fire questions and we just ask this kid as many questions as we want. It doesn't work for your writing prompt, but you could certainly do some rapid fire intros. For this, if you have new students, this was embarrassing to me, but in the high school level, we would get to January and I would say, hey, so-and-so, go work with Peter over there. And I am not kidding. This would be January and I would have kids go, who's Peter? And we've been in an English class together for 5 months. So this really became something that was important to me of, you need to know the other people who are in your class. Yes, there are 300 of you in your grade. And so you're mixed up at the high school. You're not going to know everyone. But of the 25 of us that are in this English class, you need to know everyone. So we would do like stand up, hands up, and then you would high five each other and then just do like a quick introduction of who are you, ask a question. And this was another way. I would usually work this in when we were doing like interview skills and asking good questions. And then you talked about classroom circles, both of you, of different strategies. And then I thought this was interesting, of 6 messages students should hear on the first day. I don't know if I agree with all of them or with the way that they're worded, but I thought that this was a general interesting thing, that kids need to know that learning is going to be hard and that we're gonna struggle to that. This taps into that growth mindset that you are capable of doing things, but it might take you a little while to learn that. You are the focus as learners, not me as the teacher. You are responsible for your learning, not me. Everything you do affects everyone else. You are important as a learner and a human being. And to me, if we don't accomplish number 6, I'm not sure we're going to accomplish 1 through 5. I don't know if any of you have thoughts on this list of these 6 messages.
I was just watching something about on I don't know what channel or what YouTube or where I was watching it, because but number 2, it was a TED Talk, I think. It was talking about how people get the message you are capable of anything, and they don't, and they become entitled, and they think that because their parents said they can do anything, that they don't necessarily have the realistic expectations or limitations.
Sure.
Which is a different spin on it. Only just because I just watched it 2 days ago. That's the only one that. But I think anything you set your mind to maybe would just be a qualifier.
You're capable of anything if you're willing to try.
Yeah.
Or if, you work for it. And that's why I said, I don't know if I agree with the wording of all of these. I don't know if I like the idea that learning is a struggle. But I also, I get that really what that's saying is learning is hard. And if we're thinking about growth mindset, and I'm lucky we get to talk to a growth mindset trainer on Thursday as part of this chat series, it's going to be hard. And you are capable of growing in something. But I guarantee you, I could get better at basketball. If I started practicing, I could get better at basketball, but I am never going to be an amazing basketball player. That's just not in my wheelhouse. But I do know that if I had a growth mindset and acknowledged that if I practiced, I would get better at this. And I think so I agree with you that the capable of anything you work for, or you try, or you something.
Yeah. The struggling one, I think, though, could be spun better too, with just by saying anything worth having is worth struggling for. But I like work better than struggle too, like you said. It's kind of like,
Yeah, we're going to sweat a little.
right. It's okay and good.
Yeah, mentally, we're going to mentally sweat. But I also thought that these were some nice little reminders of things. Yeah. Well, I feel like we've kind of hit those were some of the things that I wanted to share, just planting those seeds of this first day, building these connections with kids. We have a fresh start. We've got new people coming into our room. It's a new year for us to try something new. And so I'm inviting everyone to think about, what are you going to do that first week? What are you going to do to help connect the kids within your class? Are you going to have the leader of the day, your president, your vice president, your sharing circles? Are you going to journal about each other? I loved the idea that as part of a writing activity, Nikki's students were writing little reflections about each of their classmates, just to remember that every person in here is important. Your story is important to the class, but it's as important as all the other stories in this classroom. We've put together this resource packet that has some different little videos of like some video tips of how to create a positive classroom culture. If you want a bit more depth to things, here are some recommended books. Nikki just had to change computers, so I'm not sure you have audio though. She just read this Moonshots in Education, Launching Blended Learning, but quite a bit of this, she also said there were some nice quotes about just connecting. And then further on in the packet are just some other articles. So Nikki mentioned Jennifer Gonzalez with Cult of Pedagogy. So there are her tips for some different ways to truly lead in your classroom and get to know your kids. And then some different tips of different ways to connect with your students. So give those a once over. Everything is right in the table of contents. You can link down to any of those resources. And however you do it, just help your students connect that first day and build that better classroom community. And that will help them be better learners and